start off. How many of you know that PG? Absolutely. How many of you absolutely know that PG&E is providing your energy? Your energy, your electricity. Okay. And how many of you know that Marin Clean Energy is providing your energy? Well, you're buying your energy from Marin Clean Energy. Okay. All right. And how many of you don't have a clue and you've never heard of Marin Clean Energy? That's good. I was giving a presentation yesterday to a large group, and somebody actually raised their hand. And I told him he had to leave. So what we're going to do starting off is I'm going to just talk to you. You got to get this basic concept down before we get into the meat of this presentation. So I'm going to show you how a lot of the clean energy that's out there is manufactured, how it's fabricated. And once you get that concept down, then you'll hopefully follow most of what I'm talking about. So, this is a wind farm, power plant. And when that power plant produces electricity, it also produces what's known as a renewable energy certificate. Now, it has to produce 1 megawatt for each certificate. And the unit of power that it does when it produces that certificate is called a megawatt hour. There's nothing magical about a megawatt hour. It's just the bulk amount of power that's produced and traded on the wholesale markets. So when this wind farm produces 1 megawatt, it also produces 1 renewable energy certificate, or 10 megawatts, 10 of these. They're actually electronic, but I'm using paper because it's easier. And typically the guys, the people who buy renewable power and want those certificates are the utilities, or the big power consumers who have to report to regulators that they're a certain percentage green. And the only way that you do that, or the way that you do that, is you report to regulators your certificates. So PG&E has to be 20% or somewhere around that this year for its renewable power. So what it has to do is to make sure it's got the coinciding number of certificates that correlate to that power, and then it retires those, or it reports those. So what's on a certificate? What's the big deal about these things? Nothing. There's nothing magical about these. These are just like going to the store, buying a loaf of bread, and getting a receipt. Tells you who produced it, when they produced it, how much power. So when you have that receipt, and you're a PG&E, or a PG&E, and you have to report to regulators, you take that receipt, and it's gone. You retire it. But often, there are people who buy bulk amounts of renewable power, and one of them is Google. Just as an example, you may have read in the newspaper a couple weeks ago, Google is opening up a large server farm, and they're going to buy wind power from Warren Buffett, somewhere in Iowa, I think it was. Now, I don't know if they're going to buy the certificates or not. They don't need them. They don't have to report that to any regulator because they're not under any regulatory thumb. So in that case, if they don't have to, those certificates take on their own life. They are no longer attached to this power going to some utility that retires those certificates. These certificates now float. That's my term. They just kind of drift. They're out there. They don't really belong to anybody. Well, they belong to the guy who produced the power. But he doesn't have to do anything with them. He says, well, I sold the power, but I've got these receipts. And often, not always, but typically, they end up with a wreck broker. Now, there's nothing inherently bad or dark about a wreck broker. They're just filling a need. They're not bad guys. I was talking to somebody the other day and said, oh, those wreck brokers, I mean, if it wasn't for them, none of this would be happening. No, they're just guys feeling a need. So these certificates reside with a wreck broker until somebody wants to buy them. And some of the people who want to buy them are companies. My wife works for a company that buys certificates. Lots of big companies buy certificates because they think it, or they feel like it helps. It helps the environment. And they don't really know what's going on, but that's just their own visceral sense, their own sensibility. So who else would want to buy a certificate? And that entity, if that falls down, will you pick that up for me? If it falls. So that entity would be a clean energy company. And I put clean energy in quotes, just because they're not really. It could be any clean energy company. Can you guys, you see that? Now, this clean energy company provides what's known as system power. And system power is generally the dirtiest stuff you can buy out there. It's the stuff that keeps the grid up in balance, the electric grid, the big wires that overlay California. That grid is, there are people whose job it is to keep it in balance. If it's not in balance, we get blackouts or brownouts. And the backbone of the electricity in the grid is what's called system power. It's predominantly gas and coal-fired. So this clean energy company, not anybody specific, just any clean energy company, can buy a REC. And what happens is they buy that REC and they paste it on the front of this brown power. And then they report to you, in this case, this is a wind energy certificate, little artwork on there. They don't really look like that. But they report to you, the consumers of this company, they report this as clean energy. But it's not. The energy is this stuff. This is just a piece of paper. And if you're having a difficult time, you're going, God, you know, this guy, he came in today and he talked about RECs and system power, and I didn't really understand it. Just remember this. Just fall back on this thought. You cannot run your toaster on a piece of paper. You can't. You run your toaster on that stuff. So no matter what anybody tells you or reports to you, that's what you're getting, system power. And system power has an emission rate, if anybody cares, about 944 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. That's a number that's established by California regulators, by the Air Resources Board. So everybody pretty clear on that?
No. Explain the 944 again. What's that?
944, that's the amount of emissions that are attributed to system power, to each megawatt of system power. Pounds.
Is that megawatt hour?
Megawatt hour, correct. Could you hold that for me?
Could you give us a little feel for how much power that is in terms of residents?
Yeah, so a megawatt hour. A typical house, average size house, in a year uses about 7 megawatt hours. In Marin County, we've got some larger homes, so you may be 2, some may be 3 times that. Not unusual, but typical would be about 7 megawatt hours per year. So, this water that I just drank is pure, clean, cleanest water, purified Aquafina. Very, very good. I brought you guys a bottle of water. Brought this for you. Who'd like a drink? Anybody want a drink of this? This is, I'll just tell you, this is right out of the slough. This is pretty dirty water. But if you'd like a drink, okay. So Susan's going to hold this for me. I can see you guys are holding out on me. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to take receipt, this is the label, and I'm going to put it on this. Can I have that microphone? So now this is clean water. Now how do you know it's clean? You shouldn't be laughing. You shouldn't be laughing. This is clean water, and you know it is because I'm telling you it is, and because this label on here says it is. And if you walk out of here and you blow off everything I say, and that's okay. By the way, everything I say, it goes back to source documents. I love clean energy. I want it, but not like this. If you guys read the cover of the first page of the Chronicle this morning, you saw that photograph of California? Shows how we're getting, warmer and warmer. Yeah, well, let's not fool ourselves. If you really believe in climate change and warming, you want the stuff that actually does the job of reducing emissions. This and that doesn't. It doesn't. But if you don't like me, that's okay. And if you think that, I'm doing somebody else's bidding, which I'm not, that's okay. But you got to remember, if you are interested in making some kind of an impact on global warming, you don't want this stuff. That stuff, unless you're thirsty. Maybe you are. Anybody change their mind? Okay. All right, so let's get into Marin clean energy and what's behind the curtain. And by the way, a couple of things on Marin clean energy. I wish it just said Marin energy. If it said Marin energy, I wouldn't be I just wouldn't feel like this. And the other thing, if it didn't do, is, some of you may know, it uses an opt-out mechanism. That means they switch you into the program, and you have to take action to get out if you know you're in the program, or you have to take action to get out if you know you don't want to be in the program because you don't like what's going on. So most people don't even know they're in it, or if they're in it, they don't know what's going on. And I'm going to explain what's going on. Again, you may not like me or my voice, but this stuff is all rooted in source documents. I'm not making this up. So, before I fill in this graph, I got to explain what you're going to see. That vertical axis shows hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2. Now, this is a reduction. Just keep in mind, this whole thing that I'm showing you is reduction. How many tons of CO2 are reduced for the year 2011? And that vertical axis shows 500,000 at the top to 100,000 to 0 at the bottom. That's a reduction. You want to be as high on that graph as you can be. The line across the bottom, the horizontal, is time. And when I fill that in, you're going to say, hey, wait a minute. He's talking about 2011, but he's got dates on there that are 2009. Well, those are projection dates. Those are some promises. And then he's got some dates that are after 2011. What is going on? To do an accounting year, an emissions accounting, it takes way longer than 1 year. Now, your accounting is supposed to take place in a calendar year. And at the close of that calendar year, you're doing all your audits and your checks. All the numbers are rolling in. You're verifying, confirming, supposedly verifying and confirming what is what in this mix of resources that you've been pulling off of to sell your energy. So, let's take a look at 2011. This is Marin Clean Energy. These are their own numbers that I pulled off of various sources. If you want those sources, see me afterwards. I have the footnotes not filled in, but you'll see. So they start off saying we're going to get 500,000 tons reduction. We're going to be 500,000 tons fewer greenhouse gas emissions than PG&E for the same amount of power. Now, in defense of MCE, those first two dates, December 2009 and March 2010, those really were made when MCE was figuring they were going to be at full rollout. They were going to have all of their power, all of Marin in this, and they'd be selling a lot of megawatt hours. And you need to sell a lot of megawatt hours to be able to show a lot of reduction. If you just sold 1 megawatt hour, there is no way that you're going to show 500,000 tons. So you got to have a lot. So they were saying this was all based on a full rollout. So those first two dates, I could kind of discount those. I give them the benefit of the doubt because they weren't at full rollout. But in 2011 and 12, I start to have an issue. 2011, of course, they're already into the program. They know what they have going in 2011. And at that date, this footnote number 3, September 11, they said, well, we're going to be 86,000 tons of GHG fewer than if you bought the same amount of power as you bought if you bought it from PG&E. Are we clear on that? Anybody have a question before I move on that? Good. So what happened was, after September 2011, we went to November 2012. Now, they've already closed the year. But in November 2012, they said, well, it's not going to be 86,000. It's actually 15,420 tons of CO2 fewer than if you got your power, all that power from PG&E. Okay, that's a pretty big drop. 86,000 to 15,420, but okay, whatever. The date that gets me is June 2013. Everybody's still doing their accounting. And in June 2013, the MCE board had to, well, they didn't have to, but they anointed what their actual emission rate was for 2011. And you can, that's not unusual. 2013, we're talking 2011, a couple years, okay, that's typical. There's nothing odd about that. What was odd about it was, when I looked at this number here at 2013, and MCE doesn't like me because I'm very thorough. And my wife refers to MCE as my mistress. She's actually told me that she's jealous of MCE. But I know those numbers very well. And going through 2011, MCE said, we have, in our whole portfolio, one of the things that we have, let me get out of your guys' way, one of the things that we have is 36,000 megawatt hours of this hydroelectric power. Okay, that's good. 36,000 megawatt hours of hydroelectric power for 2011. I get that. But when I filed a public records request for Marin Clean Energy, what they showed was 46,500 megawatt hours of hydro. Now, if you know anything about the electric business, that kind of power doesn't just drop in your lap. You have to be planning. You got to execute contracts. You got to know what's coming, when it's coming, all kinds of details. But magically, 10,500 RECs showed up. And I said, what is going on? So I kept digging and looking through and found out what they had done, what Marin Clean Energy had done. And I hate to sound like they had done. It sounds kind of like I'm casting some kind of a wicked. I don't mean that. But what had transpired was they bought 10,500 of these. And they didn't tell you about that system power. They reported these. Now, these were wind. They were actually large hydro RECs. Carbon neutral or carbon free. And I thought, well, that's odd, but 10,500. And then I looked at the dates. And that's where things really, the wheels came off the wagon. They bought those 15 months after the close of 2011. So while most people have an accounting year that runs 12 months, and then you take all these months or a couple of years after to get everything compiled, they took 12 months plus another 15 months to buy those RECs. And then they did their emissions accounting. Now, what really was odd or peculiar was, okay, I said, most people operate on a 12-month emission year. There may be some reasons why you could go 3 more months, one way or the other, but 15 months. But what really got me was they bought those 10,500 RECs 22 days, 22 business days, after PG&E declared their emission rate. What had happened was MCE's emission rate was higher than PG&E's. So they went into the market afterwards and they bought those 10,500 instruments so they could undercut PG&E. So I wrote an email. I wrote a letter and I laid it all out. And I wrote it to as many people on the MCE board as I could, and to other people who were attached. And I still have it. I mean, if you don't know a thing about energy and accounting, and you get that letter and you read it from start to finish, you'll get it. I mean, you don't have to have anybody explain it. So I said to MCE, I'm concerned for you guys. Because when somebody really looks at what's going on, they may draw a conclusion that you've doctored your numbers. Now, I wrote that in early December, just a few months ago. 3 days after I wrote that letter, I got a response from MCE, 2-page response, explaining to me how the electric market works. From somebody who'd been in it for 4 years to somebody who's been in it for 40. This is a couple of lifts. This is one of the lifts. In the simplest of terms, MCE made a commitment to deliver an emission factor, a lower emission factor than PG&E, and that commitment was honored. Now, this is their quote, and the underlines are theirs. Okay. All right. The yellow is theirs. I filled in the rest. MCE simply performed a true-up. That's what they said. And then I added the parentheses for you guys. By purchasing these 10,500 RECs 17 months after the close of the year, after noticing the PG&E's annual emission rate was lower than MCE had expected. So, I'd been in conversation about another issue with the chairman of the Air Resources Board. Now, she's a woman. She goes by chairman. And I'd been in contact with her. And I said, you notice the subject of this says, no burn day solution. Because we'd all been hearing in the IJ, or you check online, and we couldn't have any fires, and I was really upset. I mean, I was freezing. My wife and I are complete energy misers. I was cold, and I wanted to have a fire. So I'd been in contact with Marin. She's the chairman of the Air Resources Board. Now, the Air Resources Board is they're the top dog in California for all that has to do with clean air and implementing regulations for clean air. There's a law out there called AB 32, Assembly Bill 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act. AB 32 is the one that says, okay, everybody, time to tighten our belts. You power plants, you're going to start squeeze. It's not cap and trade. Cap and trade may fall under it in some way or another. But it's AB 32 it's the guideline. And it was set and passed by the legislature. And the Air Resources Board's responsibility is to implement it. So anyway, I wrote to Mary and I said, hey, you know what? I'm cold. I want to have a fire. How about if I do this? I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a renewable energy certificate. Now, those large hydro RECs I told you about that were the 10,500, each of those RECs cost 87 cents. And Marin Clean Energy, the next day, bought 25,000 more of them that they applied to the following emission year. So anyway, I wrote to Mary Nichols and I said, it's kind of funny. Hi, Mary, as if we're some kind of chums. I mean, she wouldn't know me from a melon that fell off of a truck. But getting a response from her, for me, was like getting a response from Colin Kaepernick. I mean, it's like, whoa, that is so cool. I mean, she's somebody. And she's actually responding to me. So I wrote and I said, you know, you write, and this sentence is key. This first, or the first highlighted sentence, says it all. It's game, set, and match over. I said, I want to buy a REC. I want to have a fire. And she wrote back and she said, we don't use RECs in California for greenhouse gases. Game, set, and match over. Everything else I talk about here is a downhill pull. This is coming from the Air Resources Board chairman. However, the use of REC, and I wrote, you write that RECs in California are not to be used for greenhouse gases. However, the use of RECs is exactly how our local clean energy company outgreens everyone. Now, I said local because I didn't want to get into the politics. I just kind of keeping it generic with her. For instance, the clean energy company waits for PG&E to declare its annual emission rate. Then the company purchases applicable vintage RECs, retroactively retires them in order to report a lower than PG&E emission rate. Clean Energy Company reports those retroactive RECs rather than the actual system power that it purchases. Clean energy folks refer to this as a true-up. Am I missing something? Now, the response I got from her shocked me. This is her. This is Mary Nichols. She said, whatever they're doing, it has nothing to do with AB 32 or air regulations. So I just kind of sat on that, and I called my friend Kevin, and he said, calm down, Jim. I was hyperventilating. He said, Jim, it's just, go jump in the pool. So let's leave 2011 and move forward now to 2012. So 2012, if I remove the RECs from Marin Clean Energy's portfolio, and I know how to do that. I applied the same methodology that they used to calculate their emission factor in the first place, and then I went to all the source documents. If you want to see me afterwards, I'll give you a copy. And I identified all the RECs, and then I pulled them all out. And I said, let's pull those out, and let's put in the system power that's actually there. And then let's apply that 944-pound factor, and we're going to figure out what's what. Then this just shows the percentage, PG&E versus MCE. I don't give a hoot about PG&E. I could care less about those guys, but I got to talk about them because they are the de facto standard. Marin Clean Energy, when I pull out all those RECs, they're actually 81% system power, and I put no REC washing. Some people call it green washing. I pulled them all out. All the RECs I pulled out are called, if anybody cares, so Category 2 and Category 3. And those are just flavors of RECs that they are what they are. PG&E, you see, was a little less than half fossil-fired. And they were more than half GHG, free, non-emitting. If you take Mary Nichols, or just take, let's just assume I never even heard from Mary Nichols. If you just say, I'm interested in saving the planet, and I really want clean energy. I really want to make sure that I'm not drinking this stuff. And if you do that, then what you find is, pardon me for walking in front of this, what you find is the advertised versus the actual. The advertised is 373 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour from the overall portfolio of Marin Clean Energy. That's what they advertise. But the actual is 764 pounds. If you don't believe me, I would be happy to send you all of the math behind it. This is not me spinning something. Those are real numbers rooted in real math. But the one that got me was the deep green. Now, deep green, for anybody who may not know, is an option for you to step up and say, I'm going to spend a little bit more because I really want to just strike a change for myself and my kids and my grandkids, and I really want to have an effect. I really want to be clean. They advertise that as 0 pounds of CO2. But deep green is a REC-based product. 944 pounds from that system power over there. And then there's PG&E sitting down there at 445. They're just kind of minding their own business. And they have to. They better, because those guys are really under the thumb of regulators in the CPUC. You knock it off. After that whole fiasco with Prop 16, and then there were some mailings that went out during the opt-outs, and boy, they got slammed. And those guys hardly will talk to me. I thought they were my friends. I don't like PG&E as a monolith, but there are some really good guys in there. There really are some good guys. Probably like Marin Clean Energy. There's some good people in there, I'm sure. The net of it is, if you compare PG&E to Marin Clean Energy, for the same amount of power, MCE adds 182 million pounds of greenhouse gas to the atmosphere. If you took that same power, than if you took the same power and had it provided by PG&E. I stuck this in this morning. I thought, I don't know if I have enough time, but I just have to cover it. This really concerns me, but this is the kind of stuff that's going out to the public, to consumers. Now, Marin Clean Energy is shortly, very shortly, going to be enrolling the county of Napa. They want clean power. Marin Clean Energy, I want clean power. Why not? And they say that by joining, they're going to reduce greenhouse gases 21 million pounds. Bravo! 21 million pounds. That's a great strike for global warming. Now let's get into the specifics of it. MCE's actual of 373 pounds, right there. No, that is not actual, unless you want to drink that brown water with the label on it. That is not actual. Actual is the power behind the curtains. If you think it's clean, if you really believe in this, then my suggestion to you is sell your home and go buy a house downwind from a power plant and breathe deeply. All of those clean emissions that are coming out of the stacks that are getting washed with RECs. If you believe that, I don't care who's doing this. In this case, it happens to be Marin Clean Energy. But I don't care. It could be anybody. I'm telling you guys, this is not clean energy. 373 pounds. But MCE actual? No. PG&E verified. Interesting what's going on here. Because the verification is an audit that PG&E went through. It's time consuming. It's why it took them, partially why it took them so long to end up publishing what their emission rate factor was. They're going through this weird audit. Got to have somebody crunching the numbers and saying yes or no. So indeed, PG&E's verified emission factor of 445, that's a true statement. They verified it. But these guys did not, and I've called the, well, go ahead. They have an independent auditor. Yeah. And this is through, by the way, this process is through a voluntary organization called the Climate Registry, TCR, the Climate Registry. The Climate Registry is just a voluntary organization. Anybody who has any kind of emissions can join it. Their bylaws are reached by consensus. They are not enacted by any kind of legislative oversight. Sacramento has no authority over the Climate Registry. PG&E is a member of TCR, the Climate Registry, as is, well, they are. Marin Clean Energy, I think they are. Last year and this year, they said, or they alluded to, that their emissions were verified, but I went through on the websites for the TCR, and I don't find any verification for MCE's actual. Anyway, enough of that. NAP is told that they're going to be reducing emissions by 21 million pounds. No. When they switch to MCE, they're actually going to add 92 million pounds of greenhouse gas per year. Yeah.
Proportionally. And would that be because the real energy delivered, not the certificate? Is that right? And then PG&E's energy, would that be...
Yeah, we'll get to that in the Q&A. We'll get that in the Q&A. Because you're getting... Yeah. Yeah, you're crossing over between the difference between procurement and delivered, and we'll get to that in the Q&A. Okay, ask me again in the Q&A. Great question. So these are just a couple of pictures I put in here for you. Those are some cool plants. I love power plants, by the way. I do. I just think they're cool. I think they're engineering marvels. They're dirty, yeah, and they got problems, and they should be cleaned up. And they definitely, in some cases, bad actors. But you go into these things, and they really are engineering feats. All of the subsystems that are in there, really. And they work. That's kind of odd. This is system power. This is the stuff behind system power to a large extent. Now, system power also has a little bit of nuclear in it, has a little bit of renewable in it, but the majority of the stuff that's in system power that gives system power that overall emission rate of 944 pounds is fossil-fired energy. When we look at what the percent of brown power is in the overall energy portfolio, that's the plot you get. PG&E is about 45 to 50% brown power, and Marin Clean Energy is on a pretty steep ascent, adding more and more brown power to their portfolio since they've been in business. Oh, and by the way, just a footnote, in case you didn't know, today is MCE's 4th birthday. Yeah, my dad's birthday too. Yeah. This chart is a good complement to this chart is the amount of RECs that are in the comparative portfolios. PG&E is down here at 0. Now they may bring RECs in here, I don't know, but the reports they have for 10, 11, and 12, they report 0 RECs. Marin Clean Energy speaks for itself. So, we're going to bring it back to what's behind that green curtain. And the answer is a lot of RECs and a lot of dirty power. And when I was looking at this morning, I said, hey, wow, the wizard here, look at what he's looking at. He's looking at some kind of a dial and lights. And what it reminded me of was a picture of a guy, this is a gentleman who's sitting in the control room of a fossil-fired power plant. And it just struck me as an unusual comparison. So I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I noticed your pie chart shows PG&E using nuclear, MCE stating that it rejects nuclear. Would you comment on that?
Yeah. Everybody see this here? Nuclear? Anybody not see that? What the question was? Okay. So, and he wants to know why is that? This is interesting. Why do they reject nuclear? And I got to tell you, I don't know, but this doesn't reconcile for me. Now, this is the fine print of a voluminous contract that they executed, that Marin Clean Energy executed with Shell Energy. Shell Energy is the primary energy supplier for Marin Clean Energy. Shell is. And if you look at this, you see down here in the middle of this text, it says nuclear. And what this paragraph talks about is Marin Clean Energy saying, we want all of the greenhouse gas-free attributes that are associated with nuclear that come from system power. We want that. So, and you notice that this says Marin County down here, so this is not a boilerplate contract. For 2010, down here at the bottom, that's the nuclear. That's the greenhouse gases that they pulled in from system power that they applied to themselves. 2010. 5 months into 2011, they came out with, Marin Clean Energy came out with a resolution calling for the decommissioning of California's nuclear power plants. I don't have a problem with that. That's fine. Don't have a problem. That's obviously not the whole thing. I just put that in there for simplicity. May 2011. 2 weeks later, Marin Clean Energy, in their board meetings and in their packets, they're talking about a proposed amendment with Shell Energy. And the fine print in there also addresses, there it is, that pesky nuclear with the system power. This is not a boilerplate contract. And indeed, there it is. This is for 2011, and down here is the nuclear. They're pulling nuclear out, and they're using it for their own numbers, so to say this is how clean we are, or aren't. Now, I sent an email to the director of Marin Clean Energy, and I said, why don't you guys just don't even declare it. Just stop it. You don't have to do that. And she said, well, we have to. You know, if you want to, you have to make a change. You got to go to the right people, and you have to make a change. And where I was sent was that voluntary organization called the Climate Registry. Okay. a voluntary organization that's telling everybody how it has to be. In 2012, here's the second contract amendment with Shell, dated February 2012. There's nuclear right in there in the fine print, right out of System Power. There's Marin County. And then the third contract amendment with Shell, there's nuclear. They want those carbon-free attributes for nuclear that's floating around in System Power. Right there, System Power, right there. And there's Marin County. So the answer to your question, I have a hard time reconciling how somebody would say, we are demanding and we want the shutdown of nuclear power, and yet every time I look at the fine print, I find that there are provisions in there to include nuclear power in the greenhouse gas accounting. You've got the microphone.
Hi, Mr. Phelps. Very fascinating presentation. I love the gag with the bottle of dirty water. I also love the gag, I think it was the second to last slide, that had no Rex for PG&E. I'm pretty sure they use Rex too. So I should disclose it. My name's Alex DeGiorgio. I work in community affairs for MCE. So I found this very fascinating. There's also some accurate and probably more up-to-date information that will be on this table about MCE's renewable supply portfolio. So my real question, though, is fungibility. I never heard you use the word fungible. So and so you're talking, it sounds like you're talking a lot about electrons.
Right.
And in the power business, what are bought and sold are primarily megawatt hours.
Right.
There's a difference between a megawatt hour and an electron. One is physical, one is fungible.
Right.
So my question is it a Rex bogus because what's coming through the lines can't be identified as renewable electrons, even if those renewable energy credits are identifying that actual energy is being tapped onto the grid on behalf of those who are consuming it. Because as these documents will show you, in a stone's throw away from here, there's the largest solar facility in Marin County, which was developed through MCE's feed-in tariff. Thank you. That's it right there, just around here. So that is the largest solar facility in Marin County. It was never built until Marin Clean Energy was developed. So that seems pretty physical. That seems pretty real. There are real electrons going from that facility to the homes and the buildings there, I imagine. So I'm just a little bit confused.
So I'm not sure what your question is. You've got a couple of things wrapped in. So let me see if I got it. Let me see if I can do this for you. And then you come back to me. Okay, so we're talking, first of all, let's just talk about this. This is a solar facility that's over here across the road. And I did the math on this. It produces 1/10 of 1% of MCE's total annual load. So it is a great thing that they put in, but let's keep it in perspective. When this stuff makes the front page of the newspapers, it looks like, wow, it's a huge impact. It's a great impact. It's a positive thing for the community. But 1/10 of 1%, you're going to put a lot of those in, or we're going to carpet Marin County with solar panels to really have an effect. Fungibility that, what was your name again?
My name's Alex.
Okay. That Alex was talking about. What he says is, what he means is, when an electron goes into the grid or onto the wires, it doesn't go where you want it to go. It may go somewhere else. And so he's asking about, well, Rex and kind of conflating Rex with fungibility, because he says, if that clean power is going in somewhere else, then doesn't that really affect the grid? And I think he's saying is, don't be so critical of Rex, because the fungibility says that those green electrons are going onto the grid. And a couple of points on that. Those electrons from this wind farm are going onto the grid, period. They're going onto the grid, and you aren't going to stop it. Those guys built this farm, and it's happening. You are not throwing a switch. It's going. Whether Marin Clean Energy is around or not, those things are producing. And they're producing in Wyoming, in Idaho, in Washington, in Oregon. None of that power gets down here. But the question that everybody needs to think about is, if that power is getting delivered anyway, why aren't we told about that? That power is going up to Idaho or wherever. It's not coming down here. Now I've got a problem that, and I put this on here for you guys. Fungibility, representations, RECs. This is an opt-out notice from Marin Clean Energy. MCE secures power from non-polluting, non-depleting sources and delivers it to your home or business. Oh, no, they don't. Let's go on and look at another opt-out notice. How about this one? This is another opt-out notice from Marin Clean Energy. This is not my language. This is right off of their opt-out notice. Here you go. MCE secures the power from non-polluting. No, they don't. They're buying RECs, but let's just give it to them. Non-depleting energy sources. And PG&E delivers it to your home or business through their wires. Oh, no, they don't. Now, here's another. This is another opt-out notice from Marin Clean Energy. There you go. They secure the power from non-polluting, non-depleting. No, they don't. They're buying RECs. And they deliver it to your home through their wires. Oh, no, they don't. Who else has a question? Yes, Victoria.
I have an opt-out notice and it says something a little different, but mainly I want to ask about the difference between carbon-free emissions versus renewable emissions.
Okay.
You did mention that
Good.
PG&E occasionally claims that they have a greater percentage of carbon-free emissions because they use non-renewable sources such as large hydro and nuclear,
Right.
which there are problems with recreating at any level by any company. So according to the certified portfolio of renewable, you can use small hydro, you can't use nuclear.
Right.
PG&E does, it's built into their system, they've been around for decades.
Right.
So if you're talking about carbon-free, which PG&E claims, but MCE is talking about renewable, and they say that they do have a higher percentage of certified renewable sources in their
Okay.
power mix than does PG&E, isn't that correct?
No, it's not correct, but go ahead. I got your question. So the question is there a difference between renewable and carbon-free? And the answer is, yeah, there is. Marin Clean Energy, on their recent Understanding MCE's Greenhouse Gas Emission Accounting, talks about carbon-free, and then they also talk about renewable. But everybody is thinking carbon-free because that's the stuff that's heating the planet. Renewable falls under what's called the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which is just a law in California that says these things apply to this extent. And Mr. Brockbank asked about, so what about nuclear and large hydro? Correct. Nuclear is not RPS. It is not renewable. It is carbon-free. Large hydro is not renewable. It is carbon-free. Let me show you something. This is a copy of the invoice that Marin Clean Energy, remember the 10,500 RECs I was talking about right there? Remember that? Yeah? Okay. That's an invoice, 87 cents each for a REC. They bought that in 2013. They applied that to 2011. But here's the thing that you got to keep in mind. These RECs were sourced from Avista. Avista is Washington Water Power out of Spokane. And they were sourced from the Noxon Large Hydroelectric Dam. So, good question on difference between greenhouse gas and renewable. But when we talk about PG&E saying, well, you know, we're not all renewable, hey, neither of these guys. Large hydro to undercut PG&E to advertise on those cards that we all got. These cards that all went out that showed comparative emissions. Everybody gets one in Marin County. You'll get another one. And they are fiction. But in that card was that 10,500 non-renewable large hydro RECs. Who else has a question?
I have such a simple question.
Okay.
I don't want to embarrass myself, but you have these certificates. You said Google buys electricity that it uses?
Yeah, I don't know if Google's buying the certificates or not. I just said that they are an example of somebody who would buy from a large consumer who would buy from a wind farm. And so they put a server.
They use it
They're buying the wind.
to use.
Yeah, and they're actually close enough to use Alex's thing, you know, that fungibility. The electrons go right to them because that's where they.
The energy is being used by the person who purchased it.
In that case, correct.
And since they don't have a regulator to report to, they market the
Well, yeah, okay.
that doesn't sound honest. I mean, why would they market something as representing energy when they know that they've used it?
That's a philosophical question. It's a great question. I don't have an answer to it, but let me just explain.
That's the basic of the whole structure here.
Yeah, but well, hang on. But there's actually a subset to it. When that power is produced by this wind farm, sometimes the contracts include the certificates and sometimes they don't. So you may say, I just want the green energy. I don't want the certificate. Okay? In which case, these guys keep the certificate and then they are free to sell it.
That sounds crooked.
Well, you know, now here's it. This is an interesting thing. Let me show you something that you know, you're talking about that. When a couple years ago, I wrote an email to the chairman of the of Marin Clean Energy, Damon Connolly, and I said, hey, you know, these RECs, why don't we just call it what it is? And why don't you guys just become a REC broker, whether it's fungible or not? Why don't you just become a REC broker? By the way, Marin Clean Energy is not all RECs. About half of their clean portfolio is, and then all of their deep green is. So they're not, don't let me paint something that's not true. They're not all RECs, but a great majority. So he wrote back to me and he said, hey, listen, we are purchasing RECs from the Middle Fork Irrigation District. They're up in Oregon. And I said, okay, all right, whatever. And he said, our purchase helps build a market for renewable electricity by promoting renewable development. Okay, so 87 cents or $2 a REC or whatever, that collectively is going to help promote. Okay, whatever. A year later, this is 2012, and a year later, on their website, the verbatim language showed up. The only difference, because I'm so into it that there's another word that starts with an A and ends with an L. I'll let you figure it out. The only difference here was that this says MEA and this says MCE, but it's verbatim. Middle Fork Irrigation District, our purchase helps build a market by promoting. Okay, good. Middle Fork Irrigation, you're promoting. Wrote an email to Middle Fork Irrigation District in 2012. Nope, no plans to add or expand. That was 2012. 2013, nope, nothing new. And then a couple of weeks ago, I sent them an email. And they wrote back, no, Middle Fork does not plan to build on building any new hydropower facilities or other renewable sources. So the whole premise of RECs as being a good thing to help promote kind of left me like, geez, I mean, the poster child for this thing isn't even standing up behind it. So who else has a question? I don't know. I don't know.
A couple questions. I'm no expert on this. I just get what I read out of the newspaper. I'm not an engineer or an energy person or anything like that. But a few things just come to my mind. The first is PG&E and Marin Clean Energy both get their energy off the same grid, so they're getting the same stuff delivered. So they're both the same level of cleanness because you can't sort it out, can you? Is that correct? They're the same.
Well, everybody is getting the same electrons here. Somebody in Santa Fe around here may be getting a little bit cleaner because they're pulling off of that solar farm over there.
It's the same, pretty much the same grid.
Right.
So it's the same stuff. So opt in or opt out, I'm kind of getting the same electricity from this big mishmash of stuff as everybody else, is what I understand. So the only difference then can be if Marin Clean Energy is somehow promoting energy getting into this grid that I may be on that part of it or may not. And that's these RECs, or certificates you're talking about. So
they're also working on bringing some renewables on too. Also, sure.
Has all the hydro stuff. But, so I guess if there are people out there producing energy already that were, and they get to sell RECs like anybody else, that'll keep them in business maybe. But why won't the certificates over time push at creating new clean energy or help promote it? Unless they're so cheap that there's no economic incentive. So I think the real question to me is, where is the economic incentive in the RECs to produce cleaner energy? And I don't care if they're buying clean energy from something that exists, because maybe they won't shut it down as fast, because they're getting a little more money in. So we may maintain some things that we wouldn't have otherwise maintained.
Okay, so
How is or isn't requisitions promoting creating new energy? I think that's the only question there is to ask.
yeah,
I have no idea what the answer is.
great. No, good question, legitimate question. So last year, a couple years ago, PG&E was going to come out with this thing called the green option, which was a 100% REC-based product. They said, Marin Clean Energy is doing it with their deep green, so we want to do this also. And there was a lot of opposition. This had to go through the California Public Utilities Commission. And one of the entities that responded opposing it was the Sierra Club. Now, the reason I'm showing this to you is it has there's a URL attached to this, and I'll get it to anybody who wants it. And this gentleman who represents the Sierra Club says, he refers to a concept called the additionality. And they're talking about that very thing about RECs, and do RECs really help or not? And his conclusion is they don't. But I'll give you that source, or you can copy it off here if you want. But here's what you do want to see on this that I thought was interesting. In response to the Marin Clean Energy, or rather PG&E, using RECs and selling a REC-based product, the Sierra Club lawyer wrote, "This is deceptive marketing. PG&E would not buy any additional power to meet customer demand for the green option. PG&E would only be purchasing unbundled renewable energy credits, RECs, certified by Green E, which is what Marin Clean Energy does, in those incremental quantities necessary to green up a customer's electricity content." So what they're saying is MCE, or in this case MCE, tells us that we're getting that, but in actuality, we're getting that. People aren't hearing this. So when he says this is deceptive marketing, that's what he's referring to. The difference between those two pies and why we aren't hearing about it. Anybody else have a question?
So, AB 2145 forces the customer to opt in. MCE hates it. Do we know the status of the legislation? Where is it at? What effect it might have?
I heard from from people that it passed through committee unanimously 9-0, but that's not necessarily a good thing, because the thought is that there will be a redoubled effort to modify that bill and to get that opt-in provision changed. And by the way, let me just say, an opt-in provision, I think an opt-in provision gives everybody everything that they should want. Because an opt-in provision says, if you want this and you know about it, you make a choice to buy it. You're making an informed consumer choice. There's nothing wrong with that, as opposed to the opt-out, where you just get switched whether you like it or not. And if any of you have ever bought magazines or done anything with Publishers Weekly, and you start getting this stuff and you go, stop billing me. It's a little bit like that. Now, I wouldn't mind Publishers Weekly if I made a decision to buy it. So that's AB 2145 that is the opt-in provision that he's talking about. And that, they believe, will come under a lot of conversation and people trying to get it changed because they don't want to change it. By the way, just to put things into relative context, every time I go to the store, this is my wife again saying I'm having an affair with my mistress. Every time I go to the store or the post office or whatever, and I see people, especially the checkers, and I'm standing in line, I go, "Hey, do you live in Marin?" "I live in Marin." "Are you a member of Marin Clean Energy?" "Huh?" Next question.
If
if we want greener energy, would it not be simpler to ratchet the regulations on PG&E rather than create a new bureaucracy that just produces paper?
I'll let you guys answer that one yourself. Over here. Okay. Okay, so we have 5 minutes. I'm going to really try to be concise so somebody else, if they want to ask, they can.
I've often wondered what are the conflicts of interest going on?
Yes. There are, and these are really, these.
What are the conflicts of interest?
Okay, so what's happened is there are two guys who are really the drivers behind Marin Clean Energy. You have three. You have the executive officer, and then underneath her are two consultants. And these two gentlemen used to work for Navigant Consulting. And now they've joined forces for Marin Clean Energy, and they call themselves Pacific Energy Advisors. And Pacific Energy Advisors redid their payment plan. And the payment plan looks like this. There's extra stuff on here. The payment plan, what they did was they said, we're going to change. We no longer work on hours, and we no longer have deliverables. And hey, come on. Of course they have deliverables. Of course they do. Let's not discount that. And they have to spend hours making those deliverables. But the way they set up their pay plan is they say, we're going to get paid 40 cents a megawatt hour. Now that's getting paid just like the electric meter that hangs on the side of your house. 40 cents a megawatt hour, which may not seem like much. This year, in fact, it resulted in a 15% or thereabout discount for these two guys compared to what they used to get. And what they used to get, what they were earning last year combined, was about $550,000 or $600,000 a year between the two of them. When Marin Clean Energy finishes expanding, and by the way, there's something else in this contract where they say, well, we'll revisit, and if it gets out of hand, we'll have to redo that and all that. Okay, great. Except the problem I have with that is this MCE board turns over a lot. And by my count, looking at all of the agenda items, about 500 that have come before the board since inception, I can't find one dissenting vote. That's one just vote down. I'm not talking about something that didn't pass. I'm just talking about one vote that said no. So I'm concerned when they say, well, let's go back before the board and we'll revisit it if things get out of hand, because that board is very chummy, which is good. Nothing wrong with that. But they are very friendly with one another. They're politically correct. They're not, I don't think, terribly electric savvy. This 40 cents a megawatt hour when Marin Clean Energy finishes expanding, if they expand and they're trying to get into San Francisco, into Oakland, San Pablo, El Cerrito, El Sobrante, Dublin, it just goes on. When they finish rolling out into that at 40 cents a megawatt hour clip, those two guys will be the highest compensated consultants in the history of Marin County. Not 1 year, every year. $2.75 million. Now, you want to put that into pension terms. How much money in today's interest rates do you have to have a lump sum to spin off $2.75 million a year? $138 million sitting in the kitty over there at 2% at your local bank to make that kind of money. Now, that may never come to fruition if they don't roll out the full way, or if for some reason the board says, hey, you know, things are out of control. But I haven't seen one dissenting vote. I may have missed one in my count. I don't think so. But I haven't seen one. So this very much concerns me. Final comment, and then I'm going to shut it down. The conflict of interest. The conflict of interest, see me afterwards. The conflict of interest, Pacific Energy is now incentivized to maximize sales out of Marin Clean Energy. If you want to clean up emissions, get efficient. Hey, we can't. We're going to design policies that maximize sales so we get paid more. And this, number two, is the one that really bothers me. I'm not a lawyer, but it still makes me think this way. These two gentlemen at Pacific Energy Advisors are acting as partial owners of a public agency because they take a portion of that public agency's product sale earnings. And I've never heard of that before. We have to go. If you want to... I can hear you fine. Go. You got a great voice.
Anyway, this question is about large hydro versus small hydro. I don't think I understand the logic. By the way, is Hetchy large hydro?
I think it is.
Yeah.
I don't know this. Well, hang on. The reason I think it is because I don't know how many turbines there are up there or the ratings for all the turbines. So I'm not sure. They rate...
What is the logic behind large not being renewable and small hydro being...
That's a great question. So he's asking, how come something that's large is renewable and something that isn't, yeah, right. Something above 30 is not considered renewable, and if it's below 30 megawatts, it is. And the answer is, I don't know. I don't think the people who designed it know. 30 to me is arbitrary. Get this, in the state of Washington, they don't have the same 30 megawatt switch that we do. But here's something else to think about. You can have a dam that would be, Charles McGlashan referred to large hydro several years ago as habitat killers. Habitat killers. Those 10,500 were large hydro that they bought to undercut PG&E. Those are large hydro wrecks. So Mr. McGlashan referred to them as habitat killers, and I'm guessing that's because they're so big and massive and they back up so much water that they flood the real estate. But here's an interesting thing to think about. You can have the same water footprint, flood area, and you can have several different turbines in that. And if one of your turbines is 29 megawatts, it's considered renewable. But those other big boys alongside it aren't. So it's kind of like, it's very gray. Thank you.
Is there one more question? This gentleman's had his hand.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. In response to the gentleman on the other side of the room who asked, why, what about having PG&E just do more of the clean energy?
Okay.
And why bother with Marin Clean Energy? My thoughts about that have to do with the nature of PG&E as a company. It's a for-profit company, and PG&E or any of the energy companies that are profitable, like Duke Power, have not in 100 years distinguished themselves, showing that they care particularly about what the people need or want. It's really profit-making, and they use their energy, their money, their power to get the legislature to do what they wanted to do. If I were to believe that Marin Clean Energy is not as effective as you point out, and I think you have pointed out some holes, but believe that that's what its ultimate goal is. And on the other hand, the ultimate goal of the power companies is not to be responsive to the people. What are we to do? Because you can't just decide to start a utility that competes with PG&E. So how does somebody that believes in what Marin Clean Energy says it wants to do?
Great question, and I have an answer for you. Terrific question. I agree with you, by the way. Here's what you do. At Marin Clean Energy, and you're not going to like this, but this is what I would do. I would... Did this go off? Well, I would get a new executive director, and I would get rid of those two consultants. I would get rid of the top people at Marin Clean Energy. Marin Clean Energy, as an entity, is a wonderful idea, but it's been co-opted and taken off track by people who are making a boatload of money. Thank you very much. I'm getting pulled by the hook off the stage here. I appreciate your listening.